Took some reader questions today. First one is from Raptor. Raptor, thanks for the question. Seriously, I feel like I almost paid you to ask me this or something. You asked, what is the difference between a yearly training program for single leg jumpers versus double leg jumpers? More or less, how would I set up a yearly training program for maybe like a high jumper versus, if there was like a season of dunking or something, versus a street dunker whose competitive season just happened to be, 9 months down the road for 3 months. Not that that would ever happen, and not that, dunkers or two-leg jumping athletes have a season, because they don't, and there's really no formalized books, research, whatever on how to train them. But how would I set up a long-term training program that's different? One versus two-leg jump. Let's start with the world that's been very clear-cut and established throughout the years. Maybe not so clear-cut, but one that has a fairly established model of how to train, and that's single-leg jumpers. With single-leg jumping too, it kind of depends on the time frame of that single-leg jump. Like basketball players can spend like a third of a second on the ground when they're taking off of one leg. Whereas if you're a long jumper in track and field, we're talking more like 12 hundredths of a second, a lot smaller time frame. And actually, not every athlete really has the capacity to get down to that 12th of a second time to be a successful long jumper. So, more or less, the farther you get away from speed, the more models there are available in which to train and coach or whatever. So the more ways there are to train people, the farther you get away, which is why we have loads of different philosophies out there for training jumping athletes and whatnot, like dunking and stuff like that. The more time you have to produce force, the more leeway there is in terms of kind of athletic variety, or the way we're put together, the variety of athlete. So I'll try to not stay too biased from what the track world's doing, but just some general principles for long-term and single leg folks. What you're going to usually want to do for a one-leg jumper throughout the year, you always want to have that short contact, building short contact force, or rate of force development is the premium, or a premium. Maybe it might not always be your focus, but it always needs to be there. So you never want to sacrifice any element, or you never want to sacrifice that for any element. So if I'm trying to train strength, I don't want to I don't want to kill it in the weight room for 2 months and then kind of forget about being reactive, because it's going to take me like a month to get back to being sort of reactive again after that. That premium's on movement. So a single leg jump, a big core difference between a single leg jump and most two-leg jumps. I say most, not all, because some two-leg jumps are very high speed, they set up the penultimate similar to a single leg, some of these guys who are really elite. But for the most part, a single leg jump is a lot more complicated from the movement perspective than a double leg. There's a lot more going on. There has to be a lot more precise timing. There's a lot more variables from just that of strength and just a general, pattern of movement. So, with single leg folks, you really have to address movement throughout the whole year, more so than double leg. I don't really know of an instance where a double leg athlete is going to have to set up this long yearly training program. That wouldn't happen, and the whole concept of a yearly training program in general is an interesting one to me, more or less. When I was a track athlete, I used to think, for people who just want to dunk, their world seems to exist in these 12-week training programs that seem to scatter the market. And maybe how would you even go about setting a long-term training program up? But when it really comes down to it, training in any capacity, whether you're a track athlete or a street dunker, or just trying to make YouTube videos of you dunking in your backyard, it's really about these 10 to 12 week pushes with a couple weeks of backing off. And there's no magic rule that says you have to spend a whole year dividing up into these certain things. I mean, shoot, you can train basically the same way virtually all year if you're trying to jump off 2 feet. It's not, and even off of 1 to an extent. I mean, the only difference with a single leg jumper, or maybe even a sprinter to that extent, is because the time given for force application is so small, you have to be sensitive to that when to get an athlete to their highest level when the time for force application is so low does require some precision and some setup and preparation, especially in a competitive season. So these are all big differences. Anyways, just kind of shooting from the hip here because I don't design like year-round training programs with competitive seasons for two-leg jumpers. But let's get into single leg. So single leg, typically you're coming at it in the early months with some sort of like strength and long sprints. Those are staples. Get stronger, run a lot, try to make yourself give yourself some elastic endurance and some basic structural strength through the ankle. As opposed to if I'm training someone for two legs, strength is going to be the key for sure, and then maintain some sort of movement capacity. In the very early stages for single leg, we're just looking at some basic rhythmic plyos, low contacts, working on posture, making sure the hips are in the kind of like neutral, slight posterior pelvic tilt alignment, working on some basic acceleration mechanics. I'm getting my track hat on here. Even if you're a dunker, it's all good. I mean, you can do that stuff too. Whereas a two-leg jumper, like I said, there's no season for two-leg jumping. You can always be working on something. If I was to say, if there was a period where you didn't care about how high you could jump, it might be a nice time to take a step back and analyze the biomechanics of your jump a little bit. You might want to work on some specific drills that increase the rate of your load or loading for that single leg or double leg jump, such as like an accentuated drop squat jump where you're pulling yourself down to the bottom actively to the point that your feet come off the ground. Basically drills that are low psychological stress, but also that allow you to kind of maximize a specific element of the jump. I'm not one to really get too far away from the whole thing though. I don't think you should ever spend too long away from actually doing the full product, one or two legs. So just in generalities too, speed should be a lot more present throughout the main diet of a unilateral jumper's program compared to a two-leg jumper's, and particularly maybe a little more into the realm of top-end speed or speed endurance, so branching out to up to even 120 meters worth. A single-leg jumper should have some sort of good repeated sprint ability, and that's for a lot of reasons, which I've talked about, like relaxation, stiffness, ability to kind of get through the forefoot, ability to drive off of like a rigid leg and do that. Doing that repeatedly kind of builds up some sort of specific strength, I think, more so than doing quarter squats with 600 pounds on your back does. It's a lot more specific, and even though it's not like weight and it's kind of fatiguing, it still works. With the two-leg jumper, through the early parts of the year and even like the midlines or whatever, it's really about what gets that athlete strong. Something that works for one athlete might not work for another. Depending on like your fast twitch, slow twitch profile, strength of your nervous system, you might do a little bit better with higher reps versus lower reps. Something I've noticed with some of my faster twitch athletes is they tend to do better with more pockets of extremely dense work and intense work, and then time off, to kind of recover. Whereas more slower twitch athletes can kind of handle the same thing repeatedly over a longer period of time with less overall rest. And then, building your program accordingly, never trying to make strength the main thing, but kind of like letting that strength adaptation happen and definitely putting that window in there to be stronger. For a single leg jumper, strength is important. It's required, but it's all in balance. There's a lot of things that are holding people from jumping higher off one leg, more so than two. Usually, if you're bad at jumping off two legs, it's usually just because you're weak. And you're bad off your calves too. That happens a lot. If you're bad off one leg, it's a lot of things. It could be you're not very coordinated. You didn't play a lot of sports when you were a kid. You never tried to jump off one leg. You are completely quad dominant, and thus you hate jumping off one leg, which is kind of the same thing. And so, or maybe you're slow, you need to get faster, you need to run with people more often, a variety of things, or your ankle strength is really bad and you need to work on that. There's so many things. So the baseline training loads for single leg jumpers is going to be addressing all those weaknesses. and there's certainly could be plenty of them, and you're always trying to refine movement, the skill in the penultimate steps, and acceleration, penultimate, knee drive, public positioning, the way the plant leg comes down. There's so much work that can be done in that. It's ridiculous when you look at it from a track perspective. Which brings me to my next point, which is movement. Something I noticed, and this is kind of deals with contact time, but like basketball players know how to jump pretty well off one leg. Those who are good at jumping off one leg do it very well from a mechanical perspective. They would make track coaches very proud. The tricky part gets when it's you speed it up and turn it into a long jump. That gets a little trickier. But more or less, if you practice enough, if you live and breathe, play, and you have a good background, you're going to be okay at it. So, just getting out there and doing a lot of like sport movements, different sports, is important for both camps of jumping, but it's more important for one leg. Like, if you want to jump high off one leg, you should be playing basketball or volleyball. Not that you jump off one leg in volleyball that often, but some sort of sport, team sport, you should be playing multiple times a week for a lot of good reasons, but it's going to give you that elastic strength, and that needs to kind of ring in throughout the year. Not to make this too long, but so you got your general prep phase. Double leg jumpers, more strength. Single leg jumpers, a little bit more speed, a little bit more movement overall. Put movement in your movement bank so you can spend it later. As you work towards peak, granted you need to jump a lot in both cases, but the big thing is in terms of like weightlifting selection and movement selection, if you're a unilateral jumper, you do not want to be picking and putting in a lot of exercises that require you to hold on to force. And what I mean by that is like a deep squat. A deep squat's awesome. It's the best way to improve up jumping two legs, or one of the best. But at the same time, it requires you to hold on to force to the point that it's going to compromise the way you pull off a single leg jump. And a lot of, myself included, a lot of athletes I've talked to, they will wonder what the deal is when they're doing deep squats and their two leg jump's going up, but their one leg jump is getting worse. And it's nothing from a muscle balance perspective. It's just neurological. You're just teaching yourself to hold on to force for a little bit longer than what's good for a single leg jump. So when you want to be good at your single leg jump, basically cut to half squats or speed squats. You can still do deep squats, just don't do that many of them. You're going to be doing a little bit more barbell step up for being a one leg jumper. I don't really care about lunges and Bulgarian split squats that much, because I feel like the foot is so far out in front of the center of mass. It just isn't the same pattern for some reason. Not that a step up is like really that close to it either, but for some reasons I like step ups a lot more than lunges for single leg jumping. I'm not a big single leg strength guy. Even if you're a single or double leg jumper, I just prefer the stuff where you're moving more weight. Leave the single leg stuff to doing plyos. Aside from that, bounding, double leg jumper or single leg jumper, I'm going to try to get a pretty big bounding volume in the earlier training phases. Towards the end, probably just like some maintenance bounding, speed bounding. Start early in the year with like standing triple jumps and standing 5 jumps for distance. If you're a double leg jumper, really just, I like to keep things simple, honestly. Confusing training kind of muddies up the way our brain kind of helps us adapt to training. If we get too confused, we don't let our body kind of do its thing. So for a double leg jumper, just do your thing. Go practicing dunking, practice some different concepts when you dunk on different hoops, low hoops, high hoops. When I'm trying to work strength, I would probably encourage doing a little bit more low hoop work, simply because you just spend the mental energy to get strong and dunk high all the time. You're going to eventually kind of hit a wall for the most part. It depends on how you're wired, but when you're trying to work strength, go with lower hoop. Work something that's not so psychologically demanding and that helps you work on maybe some technical aspect of the jump that you're trying to perfect. Just my 2 cents on that. Once you get towards bigger competitions, then start doing the actual thing more often. So that's it. This video is getting pretty long, but hopefully those are some good points. I know it's not perfect. I know it's not the most clear-cut thing in the world. Honestly, when it comes to that, I'm probably a little bit better writer, but hopefully this video you can get in my head as to what some of my thought processes are. So thanks for the question, and next time I think we're going to talk about overloaded eccentrics or super heavy eccentric squats, how, when, how often, and that whole business. So we'll catch you guys next time.